for joining. My name is Ophir Gutelson from Unxeptable. I'm located in San Francisco. I'm really honored to have us joining us today, Moshe Bogie Alon. For those of you who don't know Moshe, Moshe Bogie Alon served for 37 years in Israel Defense Forces, rising to the position of the Chief of the General Staff. Following his military retirement, he joined the Likud Party, winning election to parliament 2009 and again 2013 and 2015. He served in successive Israeli government as a vice prime minister, strategic affairs minister, and a defense minister. Many of them with Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister. Bogie, thank you for joining us. For those of you who doesn't know Unxeptable, just a quick overview. We are a grassroots movement started in San Francisco, but located now over 15 cities in the US and around, and there are many other chapters around the world. Our goal is focus on one thing, and this is saving Israeli democracy. We are doing, we're having rallies and we're having Zoom meetings, and you can find us on unacceptable.org, as you can see on the QR code. But I want to jump immediately to ask, to talk about what's going on right now. Bogie, we agreed to have this conversation late last week, and so much has changed since then. Before we jump to what happened last night, maybe you can give us a quick overview about how did we get here.
Thank you, Ophir. Shalom to everybody. I'm glad to join this Zoom meeting. I'm not glad to talk about the subject, the current crisis in Israel, as I believe you are committed to the state of Israel and its future. I would like to share my opinion, views, analysis about the current situation. First of all, I would like to say that we are engaged in Israel today in the most significant internal crisis since the beginning of the state, since 1948. And with my experience participating in so many wars and operations since the attrition wars, when I was drafted to the military in 1968, I believe and I feel like this is the most significant battle that I have to manage in order to meet the challenges of the state of Israel today. The Israeli democracy is very vulnerable. When we talk about separation of authorities and checks and balances, actually, we don't have such a system like in the United States. We don't have constitution. We don't have two houses. And some more elements which are missing in our democratic system. Our government and Knesset are led by the same leader. According to our system, the coalition, the majority, can have to create the government. So in this case today, Prime Minister Netanyahu is the leader of the Likud Party, is the leader of the coalition, he is the Prime Minister. The only way to have separation of authorities, which brings about checks and balances, is to have a strong judicial system. And that's what we have in Israel for years, which is very successful one, very, very important one. And it is namely the Supreme Court inspecting the activities of the executive branch, the government, the legislative branch, the Knesset, the parliament. And I was involved in many frictions with the Supreme Court, which actually, as a military man, as a commander, at the end said not to be brought to the International Criminal Court in Hague, because we have very good inspection system to inspect the activities in the military, very sensitive activities, whether it is in operations, whether it is fighting terror in Judea and Samaria or in the Gaza Strip. So in this case, what we have today is threatening the Supreme Court. Actually, the idea of Netanyahu and its unbelievable coalition, the government, is to devastate the Supreme Court. When we talk about the current coalition, which is unbelievable, and I know what I'm talking about, I couldn't imagine Netanyahu of 2016 creating such coalition. In 2016, I resigned from the government, part of it because of what I understood he was going to do, but nowadays it's beyond imagination. The current coalition consists of Likud Party, led by Netanyahu. His interest to devastate, to destroy, to get rid of the ability of the Supreme Court to inspect his activities is because of his indictments. Unbelievable. He's indicted by the State of Israel, 3 probes, bribery, distrust, and so forth. And according to our system, because we are lacking a law which would allow him to be prime minister, he's serving now as prime minister. If we are talking about reform in our judicial system, it should have been, first of all, not to allow someone who is indicted to be prime minister, to be civil servant. We're talking, of course, in our case, you're not allowed to get a driving license for bus, for public transportation if you are indicted, or you have a criminal background. You can't be a bodyguard, but you can be prime minister. So he is indicted. More than that, he has to explain to 2 national investigation committees about his wrong activities. In the first one, regarding the disaster in Meron, in which we lost 45 prayers, he was the prime minister at the time. He got a warning from the committee, as he has to come back on April to explain, to justify his activities. He's responsible. He's going to be blamed by this committee. Then, of course, we have the big issue, which I claim is the most significant corrupt activities regarding ThyssenKrupp, by the acquiring of submarines and some military vessels from the German shipyard. He was personally involved for sure. So far, he hasn't been indicted, but there is another National Investigation Committee which will ask him to come and to explain his wrong activities. This is his reason to get rid of the Supreme Court. Another party in this unbelievable coalition is the Haredis, the ultra-Orthodox, all of them. They don't want any power to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court will force them to serve in the military, will force them to work, and they don't want it. Of course, they don't want the Supreme Court to intervene in what we call state-religion relationship. They believe in Jewish state, but not Jewish and democratic state, so they don't want the Supreme Court to challenge them. The 2 other elements in this unbelievable coalition are the radical religious parties led by Bezalel Smotrich, our treasury minister, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is, his background is being a member of Kahana, Kach, which was considered, is still considered a terror organization, even according to the American list of terror. He is now the national security minister. Actually, is in charge of the police and some other elements in our interior security issues. Both of them, they don't want any power to the Supreme Court. They have a very dangerous ideology, which I would like to explain. The rabbi is called Dov Lior. Dov Lior, according to some testimonies, was a rabbi who actually gave the religious order which allowed to murder, to assassinate Prime Minister Rabin. We call it Din Rodef. He was a rabbi of the underground, Jewish underground group, which intended to blow up a couple of buses in East Jerusalem, as well as one of the mosques on the Temple Mount. They prepared the explosives to detonate it. He was the rabbi of Baruch Goldstein, the murderer of the patriarch, Me'arat HaMachpelah, patriarch tomb. And he endorsed the book in which Baruch Goldstein was admired as the murderer. Torat HaMelech it is called. And more than that, he has a very special ideology calling Jewish superiority. I claim it is Mein Kampf in the opposite way. Judaism is above all. And they are, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are his followers, and they believe in detonating a war between us and the Arabs in Israel, Judea, Samaria, Gaza, as well as Israeli Arabs, as soon as possible. What is the best way to bring about this escalation? Is to go back to the Temple Mount. As Baruch Goldstein tried to do it in the Patriarch tomb, they believe that the way to detonate this war is in the Temple Mount. That's why Itamar Ben-Gvir, on his first week as minister in this government, paid a visit, provocative visit, to the Temple Mount. Bezalel Smotrich published an article in 2017 in one of the magazines Shiloach. It is called The Decisive Victory Concept, in which actually he talks about encouraging the Arabs in the land of Israel to emigrate, even to finance their emigration, to get rid of them, to allow certain Arabs who are ready to serve us, not as equal citizens of Israel, to allow them to be with us, and those who rejected, to fight them. According to their ideologies, there is no room for Palestinian authority. Very dangerous, but they are very determined, and Netanyahu has them in the government. Why? Because, again, they have the same goal of Netanyahu today, to get rid of the Supreme Court. They understand that with the Supreme Court, they won't be able to have their activities in Judea, Samaria, which according to my values, is war crimes. Smotrich called recently to wipe off the village of Hawara. And Ben-Gvir is well known in his slogans. Death to the Arabs, we'll burn your villages. This is the slogans of his followers. Very dangerous. So here we have unbelievable coalition, which has lost the DNA of what we claim we fought for, a Jewish and democratic state according to the Independence Declaration. They are out of it. And that's why they have the same goal now, to crash the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court is the only checks and balances in our democratic system. And they want by legislation, and they started with it, to bring Israel from democracy to dictatorship, just to talk about how to nominate judges. They want that politicians will nominate judges. By doing it, just this legislation will become dictatorship, tyrannical regime. What is amazing in our case that people started to understand it, not from the very beginning. And nowadays you can see hundreds of thousands of Israelis resisting it, going to the street to protest, to demonstrate. Very encouraging, because we have found that most of the Israelis are against it. They claim that they won the elections. Let's leave it alone in a very marginal advantage, 30,000 votes, because of many mistakes of what is today's opposition. Nevertheless, this is not the majority. And then we check it in the polls, only 20% of the Israeli people support this legislation. 60% reject it, and the entire they don't have an opinion about it. This is not the majority. And we have found that people from the bottom up, from the ground up, decided to go to the streets. We, as those who consider as leaders of the demonstrations, the resistance, we don't have to encourage them. We understand the situation. And every couple of days, there is bad news about our future, and that's what brings the Israeli people, veterans, to youngsters, high-techists, doctors, lawyers, working class people to go to the streets. What characterizes these people? This is the majority of those who serve in the military, those who work, are employed, and pay taxes. It's not about right or left. It's about being honest or corrupt. In Hebrew, it's yashar or mushchat. It's not right or left. It is about telling the truth. So many lies are disseminating by what we call fake news. And the great liar, unfortunately, shameful, is our prime minister. Poisoning system of spreading, disseminating lies. In our TV, one of our TV programs, I said, you know, when I hear him delivering speech to the Israeli people, I start to count my fingers. And in the 10th lie, I stopped counting to include his speech yesterday. Very dangerous. And so it is not right or left. It is about being honest or corrupt. It is about telling the truth or lying. And it is about democracy or dictatorship. This is what is in common regarding the people who are going to the streets. We have many different people originated from the right, from the left, religious, not from Smutrich and Ben-Gvir parties, who understand the challenge. It is very encouraging, but of course, Netanyahu is trying to go ahead with this initiative to change the legislation and to destroy the power of the Supreme Court. And he was challenged by what I call our iron wall. He couldn't believe that so many Israelis will come out to the streets as it happened, and it was growing and growing and growing. And just in the last week, when he decided to fire the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, spontaneously, people came out to the streets, hundreds of thousands of them, and they were demonstrating all the night, calling democracy, democracy, democracy. I believe that many babies in Israel today, when we start to speak, they will not say mom or dad. They will say democracy, democratia. This is the case. It's very encouraging. Okay. Nevertheless, what had happened last week is that Netanyahu understood that he is going to meet the iron wall of the demonstration. Of course, he understands the Supreme Court will not allow him, as our president of the Supreme Court said from the very beginning, this legislation is illegal, warning him. And of course, our Attorney General warned him. So he is going to meet a wall consist of the protesters, the resistance, and of course, the Supreme Court. What he understood last week that he is not able to go ahead with it. Of course, part of the wall is based on the deterioration of our security situation. No doubt that what the defense minister tried to share with the cabinet and didn't allow him. Gallant asked him to allow him to share with the cabinet and of course to stop the legislation, as the defense minister believes that the problem with our security situation is the legislation. Many phenomena regarding the military, our enemies looking around are very happy that we are now in internal crisis. That's what we try to do. Nevertheless, the economic situation is deteriorating, is another part of the wall, and the international relations. Netanyahu came to, yes.
Just finish the sentence. I want to ask you a question. Go ahead.
Okay, so when Netanyahu paid a visit to London, it was shameful to see our representative hosted in so many, embarrassing way by the British Prime Minister. And of course, he was warned by Biden. It is another part of the wall, the President of the United States, by saying, if the judicial system in Israel will not be independent, it's not a democracy. You have to keep it independent. If this is not democracy, we don't have common values. And I'm familiar with the relationship with the United States, how it is so important for us. And when we met each other saying our relationship are very important, are based on common interests and common values. And President of the United States warned him, if it will be common values, actually my interpretation, it will be like Saudi Arabia. We have common interest with Saudi Arabia, but we don't share common values. He understands it, Netanyahu. And having said that, he doesn't care. His objective is very clear, to get rid of the Supreme Court. And that's why I believe that what we have now, because he met the wall yesterday, he decided to suspend the legislation. Not to stop, to suspend. Actually, we are what we have Iran as threshold the country regarding the nuclear. Today, Israel is a threshold cutting dictatorship. All the legislation is ready. The last law have been put on the table of the Knesset this morning. He just have to tell his coalition leader in the Knesset to go ahead with the legislation. It can be done in a couple of hours. In a couple of hours, Israel can become a dictatorship. So he has decided to suspend. Unfortunately, there's also ready to be manipulated by him. Actually, it is, I believe it is manipulation, not talking about cheating, lying, to engage in discussions under the president, being hosted in the presidency residence. I don't believe in it. If we actually will stop with this process, he will lose his coalition. His partners are not ready to give up it. So we told them yesterday it's only suspension, to regroup ourselves, to be ready to the next stage in the next Knesset season term, which will be in a couple of weeks. And for a while, we have a suspension. Unfortunately, what we witnessed yesterday is another phenomenon. For the first time, he sent La Familia and other groups to attack, to offend the demonstrators. And we have yesterday some injured demonstrators by very aggressive, very violent supporters of Netanyahu, and they came as groups, not spontaneously. They were sent. They were brought to the arenas by transportation. Unbelievable. And of course, inciting them to offend the demonstrators. And yesterday, he also agreed to allow Ben-Gvir, who was indicted 8 times by the Israeli judicial system for being a member of terror organization, by racism, by offending soldiers. And the policeman is now in charge of the police. It's not enough. He wants to operate the police. He's not allowed to operate the police. So Netanyahu agreed yesterday to allow him to have a national guard, not like in the United States. National guard under his command. So we will have, like the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, to use them politically against the demonstration. I believe that the Supreme Court will not allow it, as long as the Supreme Court is relevant, and it is still relevant. But just the idea to allow Ben-Gvir to have his militias, his political, personal militias, that reflects and demonstrates what I claim the current unbelievable situation, even personal situation of Netanyahu. He has lost his conscience. For a long time, I claim that he serves in his private, personal interest rather than the state interest. And this is the challenge. I believe that in the demonstrations, first of all, we just had a discussion about it to decide what next. People will be on the streets anyhow. And we as the leaders of the resistance, we will facilitate it, and we encourage them not to give up, because we are going to meet the next challenge after the discussions in the president residency. Nothing will come about, will bring about good for Israel to be ready to the next clash with the government and the Knesset. Of course, in this clash, the Supreme Court will be a very significant player to not to approve this legislation, these laws, in order to avoid any chance that Israel will become dictatorship.
Bogie.
One thing that I would like to say as well is that one of the elements that was demonstrated in the resistance is the reservists. We are talking about refusing to serve, sarvanut, we call it in Hebrew. Those who decided and declared, we are not going to do certain activities, pilots, special forces, and other, they are volunteers. And when I am asked by regular soldiers and of course other reservists, I said, don't refuse. Don't dare to refuse. But if you are a volunteer, you can make your own decision. If you are in a professional army, you can decide to resign. And it's happening. That's why Gallant came to the Prime Minister with the Chief of General Staff, Herzi Halevi, to warn him. We have a problem in the military. Now, those who volunteer, the pilots as an example, they will, even today, these weeks, they participate in operational activities as pilots. They lives in risk. The guys from the Likud Party, the members of the Knesset and ministers, call them with many terrorists, anarchists, whatever. Unbelievable. And of course, in a democracy, this is the main claim of those volunteers. In democracy, you serve according to your free will. When I was mobilized as reservist to Yom Kippur War, I didn't hesitate, because I'm committed to the state of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. But if it is dictatorship, looking to Putin's army. Two phenomena. One is like Netanyahu demands from his defense minister not to tell him the truth. Tell me what I want to hear. Why do you tell me the truth about this current situation in the military? I want to go on with the legislation. You tell me that the legislation is harming the security situation. What does it mean to the other officers and those who serve in our security organization? And secondly, if you don't tell the truth, Putin was surprised. He thought to take over Ukraine within 72 hours, but at the end, he found that his military forces are not able to make it. He was cheated. That's what we want, to have such poor military like the Russian army. That's why those reservists are more responsible than Prime Minister. Came out saying, we are not going to serve under dictatorship. So all those challenges bring me to the conclusion that yes, we are in the most significant crisis in Israel. I am very encouraging that we are going to win. I meet the people every day, to include today, talking with them. They are very determined to save the state of Israel, not from just external enemies, from unfortunately internal enemy, which is in our government. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bogie. That was, as we said, the reality is really, really dark right now. But I do think that we see a lot of optimism inside the protesters and the resistance. People who hear you on this call are big supporters of Israel. But as you said, I mean, and they don't used to take a side because they always stand by Israel, right? They support Israel, whoever led the country so far. I mean, was it a right wing or a left wing, Netanyahu or Bennett or Lapid? But at this point of time, they're asking themselves what they should do and how they should talk and how they should defend Israel. I mean, like I know I met some people who were volunteering to Yom Kippur war. They just came on the plane and came and fought for Israel. What the new generation, the younger generation, should do right now when they see the crisis in Israel?
You know, I'm not ready to be interviewed by foreign media. I'm asked every day, as I don't want to wash our dirty laundry aboard. But you know, I feel we are talking in the mishpuche, in the family. And I believe that Jewish people all over the world should understand that first of all, we are not ready to give up being Jewish and democratic state. We will not allow any dictatorship, of course, messianic, homophobic, racist, and corrupt. We will not allow. So don't lose hope about the state of Israel. This is a very important message. And we are fighting. But we need your support, whether it is by demonstrating, whether it is by raising the case. You know, nowadays there was a report that President Biden is going to invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to Washington. This is not the time. I have to tell you, this is not the time. If you are going to legitimize Netanyahu in the current situation, it is very harmful for our case to keep Israel as democracy. And Netanyahu should be boycotted by, now, not the state of Israel, but Netanyahu himself should be boycotted by the administration. It is well understood. We were afraid that in current situation that we have suspension. Don't be confused. This is only suspension. The same objective, the same coalition, unbelievable coalition as I call it. So he should be boycotted unless he will stop trying to divert Israel from democracy to dictatorship.
Bogie, you were serving as a defense minister, and you actually quit when you stopped trusting Netanyahu. Right now, I mean, the prime minister basically chose security over the dictatorship laws. Do you think Bibi can trust it in security issues, giving his dismissal of Gallant?
Not just because of that, I can't trust him. It's not just now. I understood it since 2017, when Netanyahu realized that the former Attorney General, Mendelblit, was forced to indict him. He was forced to indict him. He did its utmost not to indict him. In the end, he couldn't ignore the facts, whether it is 1,000, 2,000, 4,000. So far, he saved him from 3,000, which is ThyssenKrupp, the submarines. And when Netanyahu understood it, he changed the priority, saving himself rather to serve the country. The first understanding to my mind at that time was when he decided to cancel the conversion and the Kotel, the Wailing Wall arrangement, which was approved by our government. He initiated it in order to solve the problem of conversion and, of course, the way to allow different streams around the ultra-Orthodox in the Wailing Wall. When he decided to cancel it, I understood that he was going to be indicted, and he needed then, at that time, the ultra-Orthodox to save him. And they were ready to immune him. They are careless about corruption. They are careless about democracy. They are careless about Supreme Court. Not careless. They want to destroy it, as I mentioned earlier. So at that point, I understood that he lost the way, starting to deal with himself and not to serve the country and its citizens.
Thank you, Bogie. I'm going to start picking up questions from the chat. So, and we have about 20 minutes. So if I don't answer yours, you ready?
Kind of here, I tried to summarize some of the text questions that came up. Do you want me to try and kind of hand them over?
Just before that, I have a question, Bogie, about, I mean, we talked a lot about security. We talked about a lot about the government. I mean, like, and about the ultra-Orthodox. I mean, like, one thing that is keep coming up is the protection to minorities from the court. And on the other side, I mean, like, again, I mean, like, we are seeing the most, unequal government giving equality to women and to other people in the country. I mean, do you see one of the reasons people are resistant is actually the fear of becoming a theocracy? Yeah.
Yes, sure. The Supreme Court is still a very significant role when it comes to protecting minorities. You know, in our case, even women, ultra-Orthodox, the Supreme Court saved them in many cases. They are minority. The Arabs, the LGBT, the lesbians and the homos and so forth. The Supreme Court is playing very significant roles regarding minority. This is my Jewish values. To be patient, to be tolerant. And it is, of course, saving myself. I was indicted and there was an arrest warning in England as a war criminal. There was an experiment in New Zealand that someone trying to blame me, and the Attorney General of New Zealand pushed him away. Why? Because in Israel there is a very impressive and capable Supreme Court. That's why I was saved. Otherwise, we would have been brought to, of course, false information, false allegations. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court is playing a very significant role, is very appreciated among judges and people of the judicial system all over the world. Now, it's very important and of course in dictatorship, you have to look to Turkey. You have to look to Russia. Now, what Netanyahu, it's very important to mention, try to do is to have a dictatorship in the Hungarian way, by what we call a blitz of legislation. Now we stopped him, not real stop, it's suspension. So he tries to go to the Polish way of becoming a dictatorship. We call it the salami way to bring us to become dictatorship. This is because of the demonstrations. Anyhow, he insists to turn Israel to become dictatorship, as I mentioned, otherwise he will have as a coalition.
Yep. Okay.
And we are going to challenge him.
Okay, let's start taking some questions from the chat. Adam, I mean, you can lead.
Okay, so I'll try to make this. There are two questions on if Bibi leaves. If let's say there's some change in the governments, one question, what future political structures or options do we have as a state to replace them? And the other question is, will this really stop, though, the momentum and the change of the government's DNA? Right? Will other leaders just take his place and just continue the dictatorship move for the halacha state, right?
Sure. I believe that one of the outcomes of the current crisis is illustrating a new political map. I knew it from the very beginning. And my dream is to have a coalition consist of those who serve, employed, and paying taxes. Actually, those you can find in the Likud Party, not the Bibists, as we call it. The real Likud members, those who are now are not ready to vote for Bibi and they don't support the legislation from the Likud Party. Religious Zionists, not from Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. The real religious Zionists, the moderates. They serve, they are employed, they pay taxes. And of course, in the current situation, the political map from Yesh Atid, of Lapid, the Machane Mamlachti of Benny Gantz, Israel Beitenu of Lieberman, Avoda led by Merav Michaeli. Actually, when we talk about Jewish and democratic states, the Haredim are ready for Jewish, not democratic. The Bezalel Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are ready for not Jewish, but racist, dictatorship, messianic, homophobes, and so forth. They should be out. If the Orthodox will be ready to join this coalition, which is very wide coalition, very strong one, without blackmailing it. And I claim that at the end, and this is, I believe in it, and I try to do it as a defense minister, we should encourage them to serve, either in the military or in national service. They should serve. This is the case with the Arabs as well. If they are not ready or they don't want them in the military, national service, society, rescue operations, why not? In Magen David Adom, ambulances or whatever, they can serve. A real leadership in Israel should be consist of what I call this coalition, not to allow the Orthodox and the Arabs not to participate, not to be integrated to the society, and not to allow these elements like the Orthodox and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir to bring us to change the whole system. So the DNA of this coalition is very clear, Jewish and democratic, according to the Independence Declaration. This is my dream. I believe it is achievable.
Now I'll take another question. And you actually mentioned the Arab society in Israel. I mean, like, and of course, not many of them are not serving in the army, but they are working in hospitals and they are working as part of the society. And I'm just wondering if we kept being dependent on the ultra-Orthodox on one hand to actually, I mean, to form coalitions. How do you see the system is being organized while actually accepting, similar to the government we had before, accepting also the Arab society inside the coalition?
There is only one Arab party, led by Mansour Abbas, which is ready to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish and democratic. Mansour Abbas said it. Unfortunately, he was not welcomed by Netanyahu because he was part of the former coalition. But it is very good news. This is the way that we have to treat the Arabs. I don't like Ahmed Tibi and Ayman Uda, although there was a chance to bring Ayman Uda to the position of Mansour Abbas. You can't make it by blaming the Arabs as terrorists. How many Israeli Arabs in our history became terrorists? And they want to be integrated to the society. I, as chief of general staff, paid condolences visit to Israeli Arab Muslim families, not talking about Christian, not talking about Druze and Cherkess, very different. They have to serve as mandatory service. But their sons volunteer to the military. I believe that real leadership in Israel are not able to manipulate it like Bibi did it. Blaming Mansour Abbas as terrorist when he said, I'm ready, I understand that I live in a Jewish and democratic state. When there was hostilities in Lod and other places, he came to the spot, saying very clearly, this is terror. I condemn it. He came to synagogue in Lod, which was burned down by the Arab hooligan. In the other side, we have Ben Gvir. Death to the Arabs. We will burn your villages. You know, the manager of the emergency branch in Rambam Hospital, the manager, Arab doctor, he saved the lives of one of our officers of the Yamam after an operation in Jenin. He came out to brief the media about the situation of this fighter from an officer from the Yamam. He has to hear death to the Arabs. He wants to be integrated to society. Now, it's very sensitive. You can find in certain Arab families, one who serves in the police, another one, ISIS follower. It was in Hadera a year ago. One was terrorist, another guy served for 10 years in the Israeli police. Our leadership should encourage them to what we call Israelization. Now, this is a natural process among the Arabs. It's not the vice versa. Why? First of all, they're looking around. They don't want to live like in Syria or in Iraq or in Yemen, or not even in Egypt or in Gaza, or even the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. They understand they're lucky. They live in democracy. And we have to encourage them to be integrated and not to push them, to isolate them, to blame them as terrorists without any facts behind it. So this is the current tragic situation with our government.
And I will take this question and continue. I mean, because there is a question about how do we keep protests keep going through this pause, and how do we even grow the audience that is joining and understanding the situation. So what is your thoughts about the pause? I mean, like keeping up the pressure on the government during this so-called pause on the judicial laws?
We decided today to go on with the demonstrations. We are not going to give up. First of all, because we believe that there is no way that this government will change its way. Secondly, they are going to go on with their legislation. There is one of the laws that they are going to approve, the gifts law, is matanot. What does it mean? Netanyahu was called by the Supreme Court to pay $270,000 to the one who contributes this money for him, for his judicial activities. And it was discussed in the Supreme Court, and they forced him, you're not allowed to get this. It is a gift. Now, to allow gifts to politicians, you might understand. This is a recipe for corruption. What they are going to do, this coalition, although there is a decision of the Supreme Court, they are going to change the law. You know, we claim that small thief is trying to escape the law. A medium-scale thief is trying to use and to manipulate the law. A very big thief is legislating the law. This is the case. And again, there will be a clash with the Supreme Court. But they are going on with the legislation. It's not about tyrannical regime, it's about corruption. So we should go on demonstrating against them.
So, Bogie, I mean, like we actually, when we set up the meeting last week, I mean, we actually called it, what should we do during a constitutional crisis? Can you explain a little bit about what the constitutional crisis would look like, and how do we think that the defense authorities, the Shin Bet, the Shabbat, the IDF, the police, how is the crisis going to look like?
When you talk about the constitutional crisis, we mean that the government will go and will accomplish the legislation. They aim to do it this week. In our system, in order to validate a law, you have to approve it 3 times in the Knesset. So they did it one time. They suspend the process, as I mentioned, but they can make it in a couple of hours, deciding to. So it has been postponed. Nevertheless, they know, and they were warned. If you are going to accomplish the legislation process, the Supreme Court will cancel it. That will be the clash between the government and the Knesset and the judicial system. In this case, we might find ourselves in a situation in which, in one hand, the Prime Minister will obey it, like Menachem Begin, when he was forced by the Supreme Court to move the Elon Moreh, 1979, because the beginning, the Elon Moreh was established on Palestinian private land, and the Supreme Court dealt with it, saying, you're not allowed to build Israeli settlement on Palestinian private land. You have a state land, put it there. And Menachem Begin said at that time, he has some pressure not to obey the Supreme Court. He's well known saying, he said, there are judges in Jerusalem. Yesh shoftim b'Yerushalayim. I'm not above the law. As a Prime Minister, I'm not above the law. So if Prime Minister Netanyahu will behave this way, will obey the Supreme Court, he will lose his coalition, as I mentioned. So common interest is not to allow the Supreme Court to be active and to have this power. I believe that he might do it if he reach this point, and he'll blame the Supreme Court for his failure, but let's wait and see. It might be that he will be allowed to obey. This is the crisis in which all of us, all the citizens, will be allowed to obey to the government. Not talking about the Chief of General Staff, the Chief Constable of the Police, and the ISA, the Shabak, head of the Shabak and the Mossad, and other managers of the ministries. They will be asked to obey to the law and not to the government. That will be the crisis. In this case, the next step of the Supreme Court is to show the way to Prime Minister Netanyahu out. We call it nivtzarut, or whatever, he will be
Incapacity.
forced to resign.
Incapacity. Okay, we are almost on time, Adam, and we want to wrap up. And I think there is a very important question coming from the audience, Adam.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there are actually multiple questions, and I'm sorry, it looks like we have a shorter time to address all of them, but a lot of questions from the US, like what can be done from the US, and there are some sub-questions there. So I'll try to give them to you one by one, if we can. One, there's a reflection that the news coverage in the US is misleading and not really touching, you know, the heart of the story as you presented it. And there's a kind of maybe question / request. If nobody like you is speaking to the foreign press, then they'll just see, you know, whatever Bibi wants them to see. Would that change your position, Bogie, in speaking to the global press?
I don't want to speak about the current situation in the global press. I mean, I'm ready, and I do it to brief off the record to the global press, to explain the situation, but not to be interviewed. I don't like Israelis washing the dirty laundry abroad. But I understand that, first of all, the administration, the president and others, they understand the current situation. This shuttle of the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State and the Chief General Staff, you know, this shuttle to Israel was because of Iran. It was because of the internal crisis. They were talking about Iran, but that's not the main topic. They worry very much about the current situation. They understand the security challenges for the state of Israel because of the internal crisis, like our defense minister understands it. So it is well understood in Washington. It is understood in London, in Paris, in Berlin. I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu understands it. He felt it when he met the leaders. But I'm not ready to wash our dirty laundry in the public media. I'm ready to brief, to have briefings off the record.
Thank you. I think to wrap up, I'll try to culminate everything. What do you think the best course of action is for the mishpucha here, right? For the people who joined the call, the people who are listening, how can they help from the US?
First of all, not to lose hope about the future. I'm optimistic about our future. I'm very encouraged from the people going to the streets spontaneously. They are ready to give up work, give up many hours. You know, I'm so busy in this time because of the protests and the demonstrations. They're ready to sacrifice in order to save the country, to stay Jewish and democratic. So don't lose hope. And in order to support us, raise your voice, whether it is by demonstrating in the social media and so forth. And if you have any access to the politicians in Washington, whether by AIPAC or the other, I know that AIPAC is neutral. It's not the kind of time to be neutral, to my mind. It's not about right and left, as I said. It's about our DNA. Lobby Israel as it is, not as it is now, but as it is in the very basic values of our country, which are demonstrated in the streets today.
Okay, thank you, Bogie. Well, Phil, do you want to wrap up? Well, I think you muted yourself.
Yeah, Bogie. I mean, I think there is a claim there. You keep using the claim about washing the dirty laundry outside, and I want you to clarify that because again, I mean, like obviously all of us here are outside, and we are big believers that the dirty is outside already. The dirty laundry is outside, and we are doing our best to save Israel democracy. So maybe you can clarify when you say that. What do you mean by that? And I assume that you don't mean raising our voices here as a dirty laundry, washing the dirty laundry.
No. You live in the United States. If you have access to the administration, I can tell you frankly, Netanyahu shouldn't be invited to the White House as long as he tried to divert Israel from democracy to dictatorship.
Yep. Okay, and I would wrap up. Thank you, Bogie, for this conversation. I mean, like I would mention that you can follow us on unxeptable.org and on Deed. Sign up. I mean, we are all volunteers. We are doing our best to fight the good fight. If there is any way you can help and join, just sign up on the website. Mention where you can help. Media, relationship, working with synagogues, working with board members, anywhere. And I will just summarize by saying, like Bogie said, I mean, like we are not here because we are sitting Shiva. We are here because we are optimistic. We are here because we believe in the state of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, and we are here because from this crisis we believe we can build a constitution to the country, and there is many more things that from here can be much better. So keep up the good fight, keep up speaking up, and keep up with the people of Israel wherever you are. Again, Bogie, thank you so much for spending the time. I know it's super busy. And we'll see you again on the weekend on protest and on Zooms. Just follow us. Thank you very much.